I'm going to highlight some of the key areas of change impacting on national competent authorities. I'm going to look particularly at the impact on marketing authorisations and submission requirements, at impacts on study requirements, on key changes in relation to decision making, and also remembering that the key objective is that we deliver strengthened pharmacovigilance in a context of increased transparency and, as David mentioned, remembering the need for patient and stakeholder participation. So this is reminding you of a slide you've seen earlier, one of the most used slides, I think, of this implementation project, but I think it's worth restating the scope of the changes. I think at the start of this project, we used to emphasise that it brought us beyond a restrictive or traditional view of pharmacovigilance, but I think many of the changes bring us beyond pharmacovigilance. And looking at this, you can see there are impacts on authorisation requirements, which I'm going to speak a little about today, risk management plans, PSURs, but also major changes in relation to transparency, communication, and the quality systems that underpin all our activities. A key challenge, and we see outside the doors of the rooms at EMA that we're unified in diversity, and the strength of the European network is this diversity, but it's also a challenge when it comes to harmonising our implementation strategies for this new far-reaching legislative project. And in aiming to achieve a harmonised approach to implementing these important legislative changes, this has been facilitated by the development of a rather elaborate governance structure for the project. And as you can see, this is based on a collaborative approach whereby member states and EMA experts contribute to project teams across designated areas that are highlighted here. And then these are overseen by a project coordination group and a joint HMA-EMA European Risk Management Strategy Facilitation Group. So you've heard today why we're implementing this legislation and the what from the Commission. Then we move to the how and what the implementation deliverables are. So clearly the parameters are set by the regulation and the directive, but in terms of facilitating the detailed operational changes required to deliver these changes, we need to look at the implementing measures which provide the technical detail and GVP which would provide the how-to guidance. So then moving towards some of the operational detail in terms particularly of a member state perspective, I'm going to highlight some key changes around impacts on marketing authorisations and submission requirements. There are new requirements, there are modifications of existing requirements, and there are new procedures and decision-making processes. Some of these changes relate to product information and trying to put into operation some of the principles around increased patient participation, increased healthcare professional involvement. Some of the changes represent simplifications, and some of them represent a move towards more proactive pharmacovigilance. Highlighting some of the key new requirements. One of these is the inclusion of the black symbol in product information in SNPCs and in package leaflets and statements highlighting that subjects are subject to additional monitoring. So this is a move towards greater transparency, but linked to this again is the idea of patient and healthcare professional participation, whereby product information will include a standard text encouraging healthcare professionals and patients to report suspected adverse drug reactions. Another new requirement is the inclusion of the PSUR frequency as a condition of the marketing authorization. So these are new. We also see modifications of existing requirements. And as I said, some of these are simplifications that are welcome both from the perspective of the National Competent Authority and from other stakeholders. For example, the replacement of the detailed description of the pharmacovigilance system as part of the marketing authorization and its replacement with the pharmacovigilance system master file summary. With the decoupling of the pharmacovigilance system master file from the marketing authorization. There are transitional arrangements provided for within the legislation, but there is a proposal to allow an earlier transition on a voluntary basis to this simplified approach where the summary of pharmacovigilance system master file would replace the DDPS. There are other changes that need to be considered at member state level around renewals. For example, the new submission deadline, a move from 6 months to 9 months before expiry of the MA, and also the need to consider the updated content of the renewal application. There are also changes to existing requirements, and one of these is around changes to requirements for risk management plans. And again, this reflects a move towards more systematic, proactive pharmacovigilance, whereby a risk management plan will be required for all new applications. But importantly, it should be proportionate to risks. And we need to think about that from an assessment point of view. The post-authorization safety studies may be a condition of the marketing authorization, and also more exceptionally, post-authorization efficacy studies may be a condition of marketing authorizations in the future. Clearly, in relation to new process and procedures, the PRAC will have an important role in relation to both the agreement and monitoring of risk management plans. And again, in the context of transparency, a summary of the risk management plan will be made publicly available. Also, quite helpfully from a national transposition perspective, in order to ensure we have a common understanding of what proactive pharmacovigilance means, there's a new definition for a risk management plan provided in the basic legislation. In addition to the changes to risk management plans, there are changes to periodic safety update reports. The scope changes so that the interval safety report that we have today will be replaced by a benefit risk evaluation report based on cumulative data. In order to realise this change in scope, there clearly needs to be a change to the format and content. There will also be changes to submission and requirements and the frequency of those submissions, and I'll speak briefly about those, but again, it's focused on the application of a risk-based approach. As Peter mentioned, we see now a legal basis for a single EU assessment where there's a single look at an active substance, avoiding duplication of effort and building on work-sharing principles, which again is most welcome from a National Competent Authority's perspective. A challenge from that perspective is the inclusion of assessment deadlines in the legislation, and that needs to be planned for, and adequate resources need to be available to meet those deadlines. Another important aspect is that outcomes need to be legally binding. And again, the theme of transparency runs through, whereby PRAC recommendations will be made publicly available. I mentioned the fact that in the future there will be a risk-based approach to the requirement for PSUR submissions, and the mechanism for controlling the submissions of PSURs in the EU should be through the application of the Union Reference Date List. This will be a list published by the European Medicines Agency, which will include a comprehensive list of active substances and combinations of active substances for which PSURs need to be submitted, as determined by the CHMP and the coordination group after consultation of the PRAC. So this should be an efficient way of managing the submissions of PSURs for the network. And importantly, the periodicity specified on this list would overrule that included in the marketing authorization as a condition, or the standard submission frequency referred to in Article 107C of the directive. The fourth scenario in which PSUR can be required is on request. But an important change in this new legislation is that there are no routine submissions for generics, well-established use, traditional herbal and medicinal products, and homeopathic medicinal products. So there's a derogation whereby these products, according to their legal basis, are exempt from a routine PSUR requirement. As I mentioned, there are changes to the format and content, and these need to be considered in terms of how work is coordinated at member state level, but also clearly has impact for all stakeholders. The technical detail is provided for in an implementing measure based on Article 108B of the directive, and this implementing measure describes the technical detail of the format and content of both the periodic safety update report and risk management plans. There will be designated GVP modules on these topics, and these are due for publication or for initial consultation in February of next year. Clearly, pharmacovigilance is conducted in a global environment, and we need to think about the impact of EU activities on this global stage. And the ICH-E2C revision needs to be coherent with the development of the GVP module. A key change is the introduction of a modular concept, both for the risk management plan and also for the PSUR, and this should allow flexibility and proportionality to be applied to increase efficiency while ensuring high quality submissions. A major change for member states is that there is now a legal requirement for data monitoring in eutrovigilance. There's been a diversity of approaches that have enriched the network to signal detection across the member states, but now we will see the introduction of a common framework for data monitoring using eutrovigilance. And this will see the availability of common signal detection tools and outputs to be available to the member states. And this is particularly important in the context of having direct evidence that serious safety issues can be detected earlier if eutrovigilance is used in addition to those other existing resources. Underpinning all of our pharmacovigilance activities will be a quality system, and the key point here is that common principles will apply to marketing authorization holders, member states, the national competent authorities and the European agency, and these principles will support a common framework for the conduct of pharmacovigilance activities. Clearly there are some particular requirements for marketing authorization holders in relation to QPPVs, the master file, etc., but the principles are common. The directive also reinforces the importance of maintaining product information, and Article 23 in particular refers to the European Medicines Web Portal and the availability publicly of conclusions of the assessments and recommendations of the scientific committees. So there are the impacts on marketing authorizations. I'll touch briefly on impacts and study requirements, looking at post-authorization safety studies first, and then briefly mentioning the idea of post-authorization efficacy studies. The legislation defines a post-authorization safety study, and this can be an interventional or a non-interventional study, but it's defined as any study relating to an authorized medicinal product conducted with the aim of identifying, characterizing or quantifying a safety hazard, confirming the safety profile of the medicinal product, or of measuring the effectiveness of risk management measures. An implementing measure again provides the technical detail around the format of the study protocol, the abstract and the final study report, and indicates that English translations will be provided at least of the title, the abstract, and of the study protocol, and also of the final study report. And the GVP module recommends that the format be used for all non-interventional post-authorization safety studies. From National Competence Authority perspective, there are many aspects to be considered, but I've highlighted some of the high-level ones here. We need to think about the procedure for imposing post-authorization safety studies, either during the initial marketing authorization application or post-authorization. We need to think about clarity around roles and responsibilities, how we can ensure regulatory oversight of post-authorization safety studies, including reporting of study results. We need to think about the challenges around post-authorization studies applying to more than one medicinal product. We also need to think practically about procedures to amend MAs following past results and impacts on risk management systems. And we also note the changes highlighted also in the implementing measures around audit and inspection and transparency. There's also a provision in the legislation for making post-authorization efficacy studies a condition of the marketing authorization, and the recital highlights that such studies may be aimed at collecting data to enable the assessment of the safety or efficacy of medicinal products in everyday medical practice. So effectiveness studies essentially, and this was highlighted by colleagues in the morning session. The directive also refers to other scenarios to conduct post-authorization efficacy studies where concerns relating to some aspect of the efficacy are identified but can only be resolved after the medicinal product has been marketed. And then finally, to conduct post-authorization efficacy studies when the understanding of the disease or the clinical methodology indicate that previous efficacy evaluations might have to be revised. So there's a shall provision in relation to the development of scientific guidance by the European Medicines Agency, whereas the delegated act by the Commission is a may provision. So clearly this is from a scientific perspective. Scenarios envisaged for post-authorization efficacy studies might be effectiveness studies or studies with increased external validity, outcome studies following initial evaluation which has been based on biomarkers or surrogate endpoints, studies in subpopulations, studies to investigate long-term or sustained efficacy, products with a narrow benefit risk where there could be an impact on how the product is used in real medical practice on its effectiveness, or where there has been a significant change in the current European standard of care. And there will be a consultation on the guideline when it's been developed, and it's envisaged at this point that that will happen in spring of next year. So then moving on, the impact on decision making, and Tony highlighted some of these important changes earlier this afternoon. But just to highlight the two key changes that are need consideration at member state level. The first is the fact that new decision making processes will apply and that these will be binding, and that these will apply for union procedures, post-authorization safety studies, and for periodic safety update reports. And the fact that for CAPS, the opinion will be reached by the CHMP and a decision from the European Commission, but where there are nationally authorised products only, the position will be reached by the coordination group by consensus, or by the European Commission, the decision will be reached if there's no consensus within the coordination group. If it's a mixture of centrally authorised products and nationally authorised products, similarly to today, the CHMP will reach an opinion and the European Commission will issue a decision. The other key change is in relation to the involvement of this new scientific committee and the involvement of the PRAC in union procedures, periodic safety update reports, risk management planning, and post-authorization safety studies. And the studies are defined as commencing when data collection starts. There's possibly a need for consideration around transitional measures. So in terms of the impact of the new committee, the mandate is broad. It includes the detection, assessment, minimisation and communication relating to the risk of ADRs, but having due regard to the therapeutic effect of the medicinal product. And Professor Leukens mentioned earlier this afternoon the importance to consider benefit risk and not just risk. The design and evaluation of post-authorization safety studies and pharmacovigilance audit will also fall within the remit of the PRAC. So again, considering and building on what David said in terms of the welcome involvement of patients and healthcare professionals in the committee, and the Commission's appointments in terms of co-opted experts to ensure that all expertise is included in the committee, Member States also have to appoint members and alternates to the PRAC. So translating the mandate into activities, it's envisaged that the PRAC will have involvement in risk detection or risk identification, signal detection, benefit risk assessment, communication of risk and benefit risk minimisation implementation, and also analysis of the impact of that risk minimisation, and also the design and evaluation of post-authorization studies. So clearly a key area to be considered at European level, but also at member state level, is how we ensure that these committees work in a collaborative methods that adds value to decision making. And a key objective is that we see consistent decision making for nationally authorised products, centrally authorised products, and the PRAC here has a role in terms of providing recommendations to both committees, the CHMP and the coordination group. So this slide is one that's familiar to you at this stage, but I think it's important to echo what Tony has said in terms of the impact of this new change in relation to Article 107I. I think at member state level we're very conscious that this is going to be a much used tool in the future, and an important one. Just looking at it from a slightly different perspective, clearly the criteria, the drive, the initiation of the procedure is something that will be at the forefront of our minds, but also from an assessment perspective, given that the evaluations will be done by the rapporteur teams in the member states, we need to be conscious around planning around timelines. A key change is the fact that this will be a highly transparent procedure. There will be a public hearing potentially involving not just the marketing authorization holder in the future, but also the public and healthcare professionals. And then in terms of outcome, there are various outcomes that are available. There could be a variation of a marketing authorization, there could be a suspension or revocation, non-renewal, but there could also be post-authorization safety studies or risk minimisation measures. So then moving on to transparency, and I think I can't add much to what other colleagues have said, but the key issue here is around stakeholder participation. We have had direct patient reporting in Ireland for some years now, and it has really enriched our knowledge of the patient experience. The concept of additional monitoring is in line with other provisions in relation to transparency, but it also reflects a more proactive and also proportionate approach so that we ensure that we actively monitor the products where there's greatest uncertainty. The idea of public hearings in the context of union procedures means that we're absolutely opening up the regulatory decision-making process, that there'd be hugely increased transparency via the web portal and a much earlier stage than previously. There'll also be representation of healthcare professionals and patients in the committees, and there will be ad hoc consultation, much as we have today through the Pharmacovigilance Working Party and other fora who interact with the Patient and Consumer Working Party and also the Healthcare Professional Working Group. So the whole idea is that we have a level of transparency that is much greater than we have today, and also that assessments, opinions, agreements and positions will be made systematically available to the public. At member state level, we need to ensure that we make sure that this transparency is applied systematically with the publication of public assessment reports, ensuring the availability of summaries of product characteristics and package leaflets, conditions of MAs, summaries of RMPs, and also the list of medicinal products. And Florian mentioned the fact that there are some further changes in the new proposal from the Commission. There also needs to be systematic information across all member states on different ways of reporting suspected adverse reactions. So clearly this is a process of intensive collaboration and dialogue with a broad range of stakeholders. The Commission has afforded an opportunity for an early dialogue around technical detail through the consultation on the implementing measures. GVP development is on target, and we envisage that consultation on the first wave of modules will start early in the new year. And there's clearly an identified need for the development of transitional guidance, and it's important that this is a joint and collaborative effort between the Commission, the Member States and the European Medicines Agency. So in terms of conclusions, these are far-reaching changes. They're based on a wide recognition that we need to safeguard public health via effective pharmacovigilance and risk management. It's clear to all of us that we require a managed transition to these new systems, and that we need to have collaborative working, prioritisation and consultation in order to deliver on our objectives successfully. But given that we have many challenges, we also have many opportunities, and we have opportunities to build on existing successful strategies and also to generate momentum for further partnerships and synergies to better protect and promote public health. And thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.